I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
If you were to describe the human experience during the last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic, certainly one of those words would be fear. Fear has been around for a long time, as long as human beings have been on the planet. In fact, our brains are even set up in such a way to see situations and people as a threat 5 times more than as a benefit. Fear is part of how we see the world, as unfortunate as that sounds. However, fear is also something that we use to be able to control and manipulate other people. Think about how our advertisements or politicians or people in control sometimes use fear to be able to bring about the kinds of outcomes that they want. In the end, though, our true self, that inner knowledge, can combat the fear that is presented to us. That intuitive side is the one in which knows what is so for us and can make decisions appropriate. That intuitive side is that part of us that knows what our truth is versus what is presented to us by other people. Well, my next guest on the Business of Intuition is all about intuition and courage and knitting those two things together in order for us to be able to speak what our voice really wants to say, to have the courage to say what the truth is, to be able to bring about positive change for us individually and communicate in our communities and also as a planet. Andrea T. Edwards is described as the Digital Conversationalist, and she is a globally award-winning business-to-business communication professional who works with the world's largest companies on the transformation needed to maximize business growth in our digital future. A change agent, provocateur, author, passionate communicator, and social leader, Andrea is all about helping businesses understand how they can empower employees to digital customers, growth, growing personal career opportunities, and building brand success. Andrea's book, Uncommon Courage, is a deeper reflection on life, plus an invitation to courage so that we all can tackle the biggest issues the world is facing together. Her first book, 18 Steps to an All-Star LinkedIn Profile, is on 2 book authorities' listings as the 100 best LinkedIn books of all time and 22 best new LinkedIn ebooks to read in 2021 and 2022. Andrea Edwards on the Business of Intuition. So Andrea, welcome to the Business of Intuition from the other side of the planet, where it's 10 o'clock your time, and I just had my second cup of espresso, where it's 8 o'clock my time. I understand right now you're in Phuket, which is one of the most beautiful places on the planet. We just met, and I'm delighted to get to know you more. But would you maybe talk to us about when you knew you had your intuition and when you started to trust it? Like, what was there an event? Was there an aha? Like, sometimes people are just like my wife. She's always been very intuitive, and she just sort of thought that's just the way people are. Realized later, no, that's not necessarily a skill that everybody has to the degree that she did. When did you wake up to the fact that you were intuitive, and what happened that caused that wake-up call?
I don't know if it's a female thing, but I think most women have intuition, whether or not they give it the credit that they should. I don't know, because as a teenager, you sense that there's danger around you. You might not necessarily act on the knowledge until one day something happens and it makes you go, wait a minute, there's something definitely going on here. So my big example was in 1992. I was at the Coptic cemetery in Cairo, which is a beautiful cemetery, and the Coptic history for me was just incredibly fascinating. When I went into this cemetery, there were 2 guys sitting in the middle, and they were obviously the guys that took control, cleaned it up, swept it, that sort of stuff. And as I was walking around, I could feel this feeling building in me that something wasn't right. And I started walking back towards the exit, and the guys weren't sitting where they were sitting. And I was like, okay, this could be a pretty tricky situation. So I just walked faster, and then I saw one of the guys starting to move towards me fairly quickly. I won't tell you what he was doing, but it was pretty repulsive. And I ran, and just as I ran out the gate, he grabbed my T-shirt and it slipped through his fingers. And there were a couple of other times on that trip as well where I was nearly raped, but it was my intuition that really made me go, there's danger here, you need to act. And from that moment on, so I was 22 at the time, from that moment on I pay attention to it, and so not just from a sense of danger, it's expanded in all ways. So intuition to me, I love the way you talked about it in your TED Talk. It was really quite wide, the way you described it. But yeah, I think women in particular are very, very strong in their intuition. I mean, in business, it's something that's so powerful. I remember having a boss who, he just didn't have any intuition. He was a data guy, and everything I did was pulling tendrils of ideas from conversations with tens of people, hundreds of people, and I'd come to these conclusions and I'd present them as ideas. And early on I realised that didn't work for him because he didn't trust how I was coming to my conclusions. So I learned how to come up with the ideas and find the data to back them up, because any opinion you have, you can always find the data to back the opinion. So that suited him, but I was still able to follow my intuition, and 99.9% of the time he was right, 99.9% of the time I was right. So I think we need both. We need both. It's really important to have both, and it's important to trust it, especially someone who says, my intuition works. It really works. I think if you ignore that, you're actually ignoring a level of intelligence in the world that needs to exist. So yeah, I'm a big believer in intuition. It's gotten me out of a lot of trouble.
So I like the way you describe that. It's a certain kind of intelligence, and so if I take that a step further, if I don't tap into that intuitive side, I'm basically not tapping into a side of my intelligence, I think is what you're sort of saying.
Yeah.
How have you been able to help your clients, certainly in business that is often, the language is data, the language is numbers, the person who is able to recite in verse, facts and figures is the one that sometimes has the credibility. How do you bring intuition into a form of credibility into an organization that hasn't really leveraged that much?
I think the most important thing is if you are a person that makes decisions from intuition, because there's a lot to it. There's a lot of, you're also taking on incredible amounts of data, and you're paying attention to information that a lot of people just don't even see. And it's body language, it's, one word in a sentence that somebody uses, it's social media conversations. There's so many ways that we take on board data. And I think someone who's intuitive is actually a data gatherer in their own right. It's just a different way of doing it. And the best way to get it into an organisation is for the people who are capable of doing it, when they're successful, for it to be recognised and honoured, versus, because I can give anyone the data, I can go out and find all the research to support what I'm saying. I'm fantastic with memorising data as well, but it's not the data that is where I'm making my decisions from. It's this other way of bringing all of these different things together and saying that's the path that we need to go, because the people who are paying attention beyond data, so data's old, right? Data's in the past. Data's not, it's not in the future. This many things have been sold in this quarter. That's in the past, right? But right. How people are buying, why they're buying, and I'm not pro buying because we need to buy less stuff, but just as an example, how people buy, why they buy, what inspires them to buy, that's not always representative in the data, right? So I just think, if you can leave, and also I think it will also allow a lot more of the feminine energy to come into the decision-making process, which we need, right? We need masculine and feminine energy, and I say feminine, not female, because men have it too. So yeah, it's a deep. We've chopped off parts of ourselves as our societies have grown. We've chopped off parts of ourselves for thousands of years, and let's open it up again, and let's let all the different types of thinking in the room, which is, diversity of thought, and let's see, maybe we can come up with something better, better world.
I think you're onto something here. I was thinking I'm writing as you're talking, so when I'm looking down, it is not checking my Facebook account. It's like I'm trying to process what you're saying here. So what I've noticed, and I want to get your reaction to this, is that the last few years with the pandemic has been a pandemic also of fear. And that it's been fascinating to watch how people respond to fear, how they adapt to it, how they harvest it, how they exacerbate it, and so forth. But I've also noticed that the higher the level of fear, I've noticed that people trust their intuition less, that it becomes less important to them, that they aren't listening to their own bodies, their own self, in terms of where they want to direct their lives, what decisions they want to make. And so I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts are regarding that, whether you would agree with it, whether you have a different spin on that.
I think for at least the last decade, we've been moving into a fear-based society globally, and if, obviously a pandemic is going to create a certain amount of fear, especially in the early stages. But I think the fear's been in our societies for much longer than that. And our politics are all about fear. Marketing's all about fear. We're being marketed to by fear. And, even fear of missing out, FOMO is part of that. And I think it's more about, we need to be paying more attention to fear being marketed at us, whether it's for politics or by businesses or by anything, right? And we need to say, when we operate from a place of fear, then we cannot make good decisions. We can't make the best decisions for ourselves and our families, because when you sit in a place of fear, you're immobilized by that fear. So we've got to start pushing back on the fear that's being marketed to us, because it's actually pushing us in the wrong direction. Some of the things that, that we're seeing around the world, getting prepared for, the acceleration of the climate breakdown. It's, let's put up walls, let's stop this, let's hoard this, and to me, that's fear, right? Versus, wait a minute, okay, we're here now, and if we stop what we're doing that's causing this now, we can then focus on keeping people where they are and work out, globally, we should be working out water irrigation all over the world. All these countries that are facing drought and their crops aren't growing and they're facing famine, right? Have we focused on making sure that we can get water into those countries? So, because most of the problems with water are actually mismanagement and corruption. But
yes,
let's focus on the bigger problems rather than the fear of what's going to come down the path. Let's work out, what can we do now to make sure that that's not going to happen? Like climate refugees, they're coming in their thousands, they'll be coming in their millions, if we really let it go too long, they'll be coming in their billions. What are we going to do? We're going to stop them coming. We're going to allow billions of people to die at our doorstep, and we're going to be all right. We're going to have food. We'll have our walls up so they can't get in. What sort of a life is that going to be, right? Let's stop thinking that way and say, what can we do instead? In Ukraine, there's so many people being sold into slavery or being kidnapped into slavery. What are we doing about picking people up from a crisis zone, moving them to a place that's safe, where they can have dignity, where their children are safe, because 50% of refugees are children anyway. And then from there, we move them on to a place where they can establish a new home if they can't go back home. But we don't think like that as a human society. And you look at the leadership around the world, what are they doing to prepare? And because they're not doing what they need to do, and they're not giving us the confidence that they're doing what they need to do, this fear mongering is starting to grow, and it's actually, I'm terrified for our future if that's the path that we choose to take. It's the dystopia versus a utopia. Do we really want that? Would you be happy being in one of those communities that successfully saved yourself, but you didn't save everybody else? Would you be happy to be a human being in that world? I wouldn't.
There's a lot you're saying here. I mean, you've gotten into politics, you've gotten into global warming and so forth. But I think the through line that we started with that connects to all these things is, are we paying attention to our own truth? Or are we being told what the truth is by somebody else? Where does that come from? Am I following a politician, a parent, or somebody else's edict on what I should be thinking and feeling? Or am I deciding that myself? Do I have self-direction? Do I have free will? Do I trust who I am as an individual to decide my own path in life and then find others to align with that as well? Or am I going to be passive and fear-bound and feel like I don't have control over my destiny? I mean, this could go into so many different characteristics around even religion and how we view ourselves in the universe and how we connect ourselves to a higher power. All those things can start playing into that and our role in that. Do we need help to get to a higher power? Or is our higher power something we already have? You know, all of that stuff gets wrapped around that, right? And so going into the sort of bringing this back also to sort of like business as well. I mean, I heard this statistic recently. It was three numbers. It was 78, 50, and 25, I think it was. And 78% meant that that's the number of people right now who are experiencing some level of burnout in work. Yeah. And then 50% right now represents those people who are now or who will soon be actively looking for some other job. And then the 25, 28% represented that the greatest stress that an employee has right now, 28% said, is my boss, is my direct supervisor. And, you know, I'm thinking about the Great Resignation. The biggest issue right now we have across all these organizations is just getting people who are good, who will stick around long enough. And an Inc. magazine article or Time, I can't remember which one, said, if you were to boil it all down, the word that represents the reason why so many people are leaving is because they don't feel that others care. And so I go back to this conversation, Andrea, that we're having is, do we have the intuition of self to be able to direct our own course in life? And do we feel others also have our best interest in mind through their intuition to be able to, you know, co-create together? So there's so many topics around this. I'm sort of blown away. But how do you help a database junkie, whether they be male or female, saying, hey, you know what, Andrea, I get it. I think you're onto something here. I sort of have a glimmer of what you're saying. What can I do to help develop that little voice called intuition to make it something stronger and louder?
I think the first thing is that you've got to give yourself the silence in your life to be able to hear it. And we're not very silent in this world, you know. Just before the pandemic, I was in America and I was so frustrated that every restaurant I went into, there was TV screens everywhere. And there was all different sports playing on all these different screens. And I'm like, I can't be in this place. It's just so noisy everywhere I went. And then you see people on their bikes or running or cycling, fair enough for running, but people don't look for enough peace in their life. They don't look for enough quiet. And, you know, everyone's just got so much information coming at them, me included. And we've got to find the space for silence. You know, the biggest thing I ever did, the biggest gift I ever gave myself was I went traveling for months and months at a time by myself. And in that time, I had to face my own head. And when you face your own head, it can be pretty scary because there's all sorts of stuff going on in there. But if you don't give yourself the space and the quiet to hear your own thoughts, and then you give yourself a chance to go, wait a minute, do I actually believe that? Where did that come from? You know, and you start saying, well, that's a thought that I got from my mum when I was a young child, but I don't actually resonate with that at all. It doesn't match me at all. And you start sort of cleaning out, you know, your internal closets of all this clutter that other people put in there, or institutions or religions or business or whatever, schools, and the culture that you grew up in. I mean, there's so many aspects to it, right? And if you can give yourself the space for silence and do it regularly, like, you know, most people won't put a backpack on like I did and just go and see where it takes them. I had return tickets. I landed in one city and I was leaving another city and I had no plans between those cities. It was just 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and I'd see what happened. But yeah, a lot of time by myself, and it's you know, sometimes it was just anguish, you know, just dealing with these thoughts in your head. But go for the silence wherever you can. Turn it off. You don't have to listen to it all. You know, turn YouTube off, turn the podcasts off, just turn it all off. Just do it for a week. Do it for a day if that's all you've got. But find silence. You know. Friends of mine, they surf, and that's their silence, you know, just anything that you can do just to get the noise of the world out of your head so you can start hearing your own voice again. And that's where your intuition sits, right? It's in you.
That's a great point. I have gone as far at times to do some time in a sensory deprivation tank, which for those of you who don't know it, it's a big egg-shaped structure that's filled with the temperature of water that mirrors your own body temperature. You get into this thing, it closes up, and you can't see a thing, you can't smell anything, you can't feel anything because the air and the water are the same temperature as your body. And you are immersed in silence to the point where the loudest thing that you can hear, which is almost deafening, is your own heartbeat. And boy, if that doesn't give me the heebie-jeebies at times when I've done it, is like, my mind is still racing. My son tells me, Dad, do you ever turn off your brain? Because I'm always thinking, I'm always creating something. I've always got something else in my head. But I've spent so much of my own life trying different ways to slow down, different ways to be in that moment, to be in that presence that you talk about, to turn off the world. And because my style, my tendency is to go opposite. But there's been a lot of actions to try to mitigate that. And I do believe you're right. That's where intuition starts. Is in that silence and being in the present. Yeah,
and that's hard for a lot of people to do, to put themselves in the present moment. So one of the things I like to do, and I've been in one of those sensory tanks, but it was a big room rather than the egg-shaped thing, which was nicer. But I'll often lie on my back at the end of the day after I swim my laps, and I've got these incredible trees around us, and every night the cicadas start singing and the bugs start flying. And then the birds and the bats come out, and then there's these eagles that fly over, and I just really consciously try and just look at the moment. This twice a day, this moment happens where this life comes out, and I want to watch it and take it on board and listen to it and smell it, and that's one of my anchoring myself in the moment, because especially, this year for me has been, I'm like you, my mind is just all the time, and I know my husband's exhausted by it. I'm sure my children are too. But this year, especially the last few months, like since the war in Ukraine started, which is just like, it's the last thing the world needs right now. And we don't know where it's going to go, because we don't know what Putin's up to. Like, we don't know, somebody was just talking about him from an Enneagram perspective the other day, and it was a way of thinking that was very, 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 very rare. And it made me even more concerned that, the other leaders of the world, are they going to react appropriately so that it doesn't escalate into a place that none of us want, right? And at the same time, the environment crisis, we had the two poles with their extreme temperatures, the IPCC report, the climate scientists saying, it's accelerating. We weren't expecting it to be where we are until 2050. Things are getting really serious. And my mind is like Sunday. It's probably the first time I felt like the whirring in my mind, it was close to exploding, I was just like, and I'm like, all right, I got to get away from this. I've got to have a break from it. It's too much because it's big. It's big what's going on in the world, and it's hard to take it on board. And I think that's another thing that, people have got to really be paying attention to, is their mind and their strength in their mind. We know mental health issues are huge at the moment.
Yes.
And I saw another report, 50% of employees are sick and tired of change. They just want to, but I think all we've got ahead of us is change. So we've got to get our minds strong.
Right. Back to your point, I think before we started recording I think you mentioned mental fitness or mental strength or something, that I think to that point where we have to really get a handle on ourselves, because it's not going to be the external world that's going to do it for us. We really have to go back to, like, I'm thinking about Stephen Covey. I think years ago he had two circles, and there was one circle that was smaller, and then surrounding it was a larger circle, and what they represented was the inner circle was the things that you can control, and the outer circle are the things that you worry about that you can't control. And so therefore our time and energy, our focus should be on those things that we can control, or we choose to control, we choose to play a part of. And there's so many things outside of our jurisdiction that we just can't do anything about, or we don't have the resources to do anything about. So focus on your own neighborhood, so to speak, which is starts with self, starts with who you are. And I'm thinking about, like, I was thinking as you were talking about intuitive discipline, and I was on a call yesterday with a company, and they're just so concerned about a lot of different things, changes and growth, and market fluctuations and so forth. Everybody on the call was just saying one way or another that they're burned out and that they are frustrated. And all I could come up with for them in a short amount of time was take an hour or maybe two in the morning just for yourself. Get centered. Meditate, go for a walk, do the work that you do, go for a surf if you are near that. Whatever it is to get your head on straight. Don't start the day with a cup of coffee and hopping into email before you even get out of the shower. But get yourself grounded. Like professional athletes do this when they're preparing for a meet or a game or whatever, that they get themselves mentally ready for what they're about to do. But we don't do that in business. We just jump in, and then the frenetic energy that starts our day continues throughout the day. And we wonder why at 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock when we're finished, while we're exhausted and still anxious. And so we throw on our headsets and listen to some more YouTube videos and go to sleep that way. It becomes the process where we just keep separating ourselves from ourselves.
Yeah. I think we've got a big problem, and I think it's even more than a couple of hours in the morning. I think we've got to recognise, I know I'm feeling it. I think we've got to recognise that there's a lethargy in us that, it's off the back of the last couple of years, but it's, I call it news shocks. We had the news shock when the pandemic hit, and it's been more shocks ever since. Then there was the Delta variant, then there was this, and there was that, and then we've got Ukraine, and then, the climate crisis keeps popping up, and we just keep being hit with these news shocks, and everyone's sitting there going, what's going to be next? And there is going to be next. And I think, we've got to, from a business perspective, I think that people have just got to look at it and go, I think there's a lot of people that are just going to be making very, very different decisions about their life. The great resignation in the second year is older knowledge workers. It's people with 15 or more years experience, right? And they're just like, no, I don't want to do this. I was reading an article on HBR, and somebody's setting up a food stall in Hawaii, and that's their choice now, and obviously older people have more financial means, but I think it's more than that. It's just people are done. It's been an exhausting time. So I think, you see this rush back to the office and this pushback by the employees, and, it's an opportunity to create a completely new model for business. And we need a new model for business anyway, so let's do it. And also government should be looking at things like universal basic income. So we should be starting to move towards this new way of living, because the world needs that to get back in harmony with Earth. So, we've got a lot of good opportunities ahead of us, but it seems like we're so desperate to hang on to the old and return to the old, but actually we're moving into the new, and the new is going to be completely different. And let's just focus on the new and building something that's better than what we left behind. Because what we had before was built on the suffering of others, people around the world, as well as the environment. So why can't we build a world that's not on the back of somebody else or something else suffering for it, So I think that's where people are, they're just, I had enough.
I think it takes bold leadership. I think it takes people like yourself and others to speak this way, to be able to take a look at the fact that we are now in a major historic amount of human evolution and change, and we either go kicking and screaming, or we can become leaders and help make this happen. And I think that's what we really need to do. We almost need to be, and this sounds too provocative, business revolutionaries. I mean this in a positive sense. Let's not say, let's just go back to the way things were before the pandemic. 2019, things were so great. You've missed the point if we think that that's going to work, because it didn't really work then, and it's certainly not going to work now. And I think that's where we need strong thought leaders like yourself to continue to paint the picture and show us the way to do that.
Yeah, there was this story, I think it was just last week or the week before. It was very recent. The World Bank basically came out and said, we need to completely redesign how we operate, who's part of it, how we fund, the developing countries around the world. And it was one of those decisions that I was like, finally this conversation has started. But every single industry on this planet needs to sit there and look at themselves and come together and say, how do we transform our entire industry? There's so many industries fighting to hang on. And that's what we need them to stop doing. Stop,
right.
It's resistance. And let's stop resisting and let's start collaborating and saying, what does it look like that's better for us? There's these two guys that they've got a solution to the fossil fuel industry, because we need to have that conversation rather than holding on to this industry, which is going to get, they're going to be stranded assets all over the world. I was just reading a story in Nigeria where Shell sold one of its fossil fuel plants to a local provider, and now the actual pollution from this plant is so much worse than it was before because this other company has no constraints. They're not signed up to any deals. They're not taking care of the planet, right? And it's just one of those classic examples of Shell's making these decisions to offload its assets before they have no value. Well, let's rethink that, because we don't actually want it to go into hands where it's even worse, and then we're doing even more damage in the environment. So, it's time for really, really fresh eyes on every industry, and we can do this, and that's my hope, that there's so many smart people in this world that can come together and have these conversations and work it out, and every industry needs to do it. And I'm getting a little bit frustrated it's not happening fast enough, but I'm going to keep pushing for it.
Yeah. All right, so let me, before I ask you to share with those listening in how they can connect to you, we had a lot we talked about. We could talk about this for a couple of days before, but I'm hearing this for the first time. You're brand new to me. Andrea, what's one thing that I should be doing that would be helpful for me in my world? What is one thing that I could do to move myself forward?
I think you personally or your audience?
I'm talking about my audience.
Yeah, good. Okay. You can edit that one out.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. Be a voice in the world. Step into your voice. Have courage.
Be a voice.
Yeah. If you know the answers to something, or if you're concerned about something, if you're not liking the way something's going in your community, in your society, the marketing of fear to people, if you've got leaders that are dividing you, if when they talk to you, there's an other that's the enemy, that's always a sign to step back and go, wait a minute, and question it and challenge it and speak up about it. Because I think the good people have disappeared from the digital platforms, and the bad actors are still there. They're stronger than ever, and they have an outsized presence on the global conversation. And the good people in the world need to get control back of that. And we're not. We're stepping away because it's too ugly, and we can't. We've got to step into it, because this is the future for all of us that we're fighting for. So open up and be a voice for good.
Great. So that sounds like the word, if I were to choose one that defines what you just said, which probably leads us into my final question, is courage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about, tell our listeners about how they can connect to you and sort of follow your thought leadership.
All right. So my social media handle and my professional website is Andrea T. Edwards. So I'm very easy to find on social media. I'm very active. And then my book's website is uncommon-courage.com. So I'm out there on social media. You'll definitely find me.
Great. Well, Andrea, it's really great to talk to you. It's time now to go to bed because it's 10:30 there in Phuket. But I really appreciate the thing that really sticks out for me is how you were able to knit intuition with courage, and really the duty that we have to ourselves and to the planet to speak up and to be a voice of good. Yeah. And to have, first and foremost, know what our voice is, but then to start to share it. So I really appreciate your time and your energy on this, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. It's great. It was great to meet you. I really enjoyed your TED Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.